Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening. It's April 24th. I'm Christy Boudreau, Chair of the Hatfield School Committee, and we'd like to welcome you to our fiscal 24 budget hearing. Tonight is going to be a very streamlined meeting, and we're going to start off in our typical way, which is to open it up for public comment. And we also tonight have an extra opportunity for the public to engage with the committee. And we're going to be making a presentation on our budget. We're going to open it up for questions either through our Zoom link or anyone who's with us in person. We'll have a conversation depending on what the folks are interested in. And then the committee is going to be asked to vote on our budget. So to kick things off, we also enjoy just sort of celebrating what the mission of our district is by sharing mission moments. And so before we go to public comment, I would like to open it up to see if anyone has a mission moment to share this evening. Dr. Driscoll.
Sure. So we're now in the spring sports season. And as you know, we've had a bit of a dip in enrollment this year at Smith Academy. But one thing that's come out through our sports numbers is that our those numbers have remained pretty stable despite a dip in enrollment. So comparatively, the percentage of students that we have enrolled in sports in all seasons is up across the board, both for boys and girls. On average, it was up 12.5% in the fall, 8% in the winter, and 3% in the spring. Now you could say that that is mostly because we have a smaller enrollment, so smaller sample size. But even looking at the core numbers that we have an increase in every season except a slight dip in the spring season, and pretty stable numbers of sports participants. So it's really nice to see that we have a robust and resilient program still operating. So it was when enrollment dips, you'd expect to see that dip across the board, but we haven't. We've seen the opposite, which is great.
Awesome to see students really engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else want to share a mission moment before we go to public comment? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was able to meet with a member of our school team who is funded through a grant this year, part-time, Kim Tran, who is our mental health liaison. So he has been putting together all sorts of resources and helping us with the protocols of each individual agency that we access, because that is a lot of work for our two counselors and nursing staff, myself, to get through who is the contact person, where is the enrollment forms, who does this agency help. And so I met with him right before break, and just really what great use of that grant funding to help with our clinical supports and our students. And really just an asset, a lot of deliverables that will be have been rolled out and will continue to be rolled out to our staff and families that to access other supports that impact student performance when they're at school. So
Gift that will keep on giving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, seeing that. Do we have public comment tonight before we move on to the budget hearing? Is there anyone in person who would like to speak? Is there anyone online who would like to speak? Okay.
Do you want to clarify that the questions will come at the end?
Mm-hmm. So we're going to table all other pieces of our agenda for this evening. We didn't know if we would need administrative updates. I don't think we do. And we meet again in May. We can vote on graduation awards on May 8th at our business meeting. And so tonight is going to be strictly to the budget hearing. So what we would like to do, we have quite a bit of information to share. And so what we would really like to do is to go through that and coming out of that, take questions. And so if there's a point at which you're like, oh, I need to come back to that, jot a note. And we will be happy to do so. But I think if we stop and do questions, we would be less efficient. And so just in the sake of everyone's time, we're going to jump right in. Sound good?
Mhm.
Okay. So here we go, John. So the public schools are coming forward, and we're proposing a 3.7% investment in addition to level services for fiscal year 24. And this presentation is going to walk through the services that are covered, both that we would get through level services and particularly spell out what would be part of the investment. We've broken out costs both for level services and for the investment. And we'll take a look at savings and revenue efforts that we have made, as well as talk about the anticipated return on investment, because that's the reason we're asking for it. We also want to make sure that we're putting this budget forward with the broader context, why we're looking for the investment, and we'll talk about local and area population shifts enrollment, to look at school choice trends and the impacts to town if we fail to invest in our public school district. And lastly, because this is a particular year for budgets across town, we want to make sure that we're looking at the school budget within the landscape of the town budget as a whole. And so we're going to review some impacts that there would be with and without an override vote, and maybe even a little primer on what is an override, just because that's not something all of us follow all the time. So with that, a quick look at what goes on today at Hatfield Public Schools. Obviously, the focus is on academics and social emotional learning. There's new math curriculum, new math assessments, an advisory model for 7 through 12, literacy training focuses happening at K through 6, district training on multi-tiered systems of support, which has been bolstering throughout all grades, the pyramid model has been built for preschool, and the bullying curriculum that was launched earlier this year in K through 6. From the standpoint of our security facility and tech updates, we have made security upgrades at both schools, both in terms of phones and locks. We have increased the internet bandwidth without a cost increase. And we've provided and improved the billing for technology so that we can get better service for a lower price. We've been managing some pretty difficult situations in facilities. So we have had roof and HVAC issues that have plagued us all year, and have been managing that within our budget. And we have a website overhaul in the works for the summer. Coming out of last spring, we had successful contract negotiations with our teachers and our support professionals, and they're now on the same 3-year schedule. And the increase for the teachers was a 2.6% increase. And most importantly, we were fully staffed at the start of the year, and we have a stable bench of administrators, which is something that a lot of districts cannot say. And we're mighty pleased. So thank you, administration. We, all year long, look for ways to find savings and to generate revenue and to add more value. So in the savings front, this year we had the chance to turn on the solar power at Smith Academy, which is helping offset some cost increases. We've decreased the monthly phone costs at both Smith Academy and the elementary school. We've decreased the cost of our SIM software. We participate in group purchasing through the collaborative. And this is my personal favorite, we participate in the Hampshire Cow Power, whereby we reduce our electrical costs by purchasing net metering credits from local dairy farms. And so that's a 15% discount while supporting local farms. It doesn't really get better than that. In terms of generating revenue, we have built in-house programs for students which save out-of-district tuition costs, and they open up revenue options for incoming students. And so we're looking at some savings there, around $67,000 in our fiscal 24 budget. The preschool revenues are increasing because we took tuition up and we have increased the enrollment. And so we're doing well with our preschool revenues. And in terms of adding value without cost, we have before and after programs at the elementary school, which is cost neutral to the district, but a huge benefit to parents. And we've upgraded the internet service, as we mentioned. So we have better service, faster speeds, and not a cost increase. Level services for next year would include maintaining the same number of teachers and sections, which is small class sizes. And that's something that we believe is really critical to our district 3-year plan. It's what Hatfield is known for: small, personal attention, small groups. We are maintaining 2 preschool classrooms, which is part of generating revenue and building our long-term enrollment. We're keeping electives at Smith Academy. And when anyone wants to take a look at this offline, you'll see that links, and you can go see all the courses offered at Smith Academy because that links to our course listing. We're keeping our sports teams with level services. We have existing software available to everyone. We have maintaining technical support, both in hardware and Chromebooks. We would be obviously continuing rigorous professional development and expanding electives through semester course offerings, which doesn't require a staff increase. The budget in total, the new funding request from this budget to Town of Hatfield is $731,837. 64% of that funding meets level service. So that's what we need to make the same school we have today next year. And so you'll see on the chart in front of you that everything that's in purple is really getting to level service. 72% of that is what would be level funded. So that's what town spent on us this year. It would require an additional 6.5% in tax revenue to cover what we're servicing today. We're also asking for that investment, that 3.7%, which is also $264,000. The full budget, however, also includes $830,000 in school choice funds and grant funding that we know is secure, which is $433,000. It's about 6% of our budget. So it's worth people noting that the school choice funds, which you see there in teal, it's 11.5% of our budget this year, that historically that average has been about 20%. So we saw a 15% drop in our school choice students from 22 to 23, which impacted the funds that are available for next year. And so while we traditionally have been around 20% of our budget has been funded through school choice, using all the available dollars, we're at 11.5%. So the need for our budget next year has a greater emphasis on what we need the town to help cover. And that's what we're going to talk about in terms of why we're looking for the investment, is to rebuild that revenue. So I'm driving on a different computer. So staffing required for level services and the investment plan, just sort of a side by side. We're looking for an enrollment uptick through that opportunity. We would look to add 2 teachers with the investment plan and 1 licensed support staff. Same number of support professionals, same number of custodians, the administrative assistants, and administrators. So the target enrollment to get to that goal is fewer than 3 students per grade. The funding sources that support this, some of them go to town, some of them come to us. There is a very small increase in Chapter 70 money forecasted, but that's not yet final. As we just mentioned, we're tapping the school choice funds. The town contributions still requiring, town does meet their contributions, but we spend a little less than the average Massachusetts district on that. Preschool revolving, again, we increase that tuition. The athletic revolving supports this, the IDEA grant, circuit breaker funds, and obviously year-round we look for every available fund that is possible to come in and support our budget. Some notable differences. So we are spending the last dregs of what is available in our ESSER 3 spending. So that federal dollars that came in during COVID, which we have spent. We've got more competitive wages than we have had in past. And that is part of the reason we have been able to be fully staffed, particularly when we're talking about our support professionals, where there was a really big gap between where we were and where we needed to be to just keep those positions filled. And then the Chapter 70 budget, in general, this isn't specific to us, but the state funding has really not kept pace with the fiscal realities of rural schools. We also have seen level for all services that are relatively fixed, things that we don't have a lot of control over. So to get the same services, those costs for next year, we're looking at about that 6.5% increase. So there's a little chart there that kind of shows you how that breaks out. And I went back, this was one of the places I spent a lot of time on budget updates this year because I really wanted to understand where those costs were because was there anything we could do about them? Salaries make up 78% of our budget. So we would anticipate if we're going to see a big increase that would be, I mean, if it were proportionate, that would be 80% of the increase, but it's not. So those salary adjustments, the teacher's contract is just a hair shy of half of that increase total. What we're seeing is a rise in other things. So in particular, the disproportionate increases. We're budgeting a 36% increase for maintenance. So I think we have spoken at every meeting this year about the roof and about the HVAC. We have 2 boilers at the elementary school that are pretty much ready to go. Both are on the capital plan, as is the roof. And there's air handling unit that has a hole in it at Smith Academy that we're trying to deal with this year, if we possibly can. In all of these cases, they're capital needs, which are on the capital budget, but the maintenance of them is with the school budget. And so we're making sure that we're covering because our maintenance costs have been so much higher this year. We have built in additional funding for that next year. And we also recognize that the capital budget is likely to be fairly small. It is not set yet. We don't know what of our needs are going to be met by capital. But I think we can anticipate that it won't be the full list. Even in a good year, it wouldn't be the full list. And it's likely to be a very small piece of what we need, in which case we need to continue to maintain. Because some of these things were they to go out would mean if they happen in the winter, if boilers were out at the elementary school, we wouldn't be able to have school. So we've seen a 26% rise in contractual services. So you'll see a little wedge there that talks about supporting special education. That's both internal and external costs for a whole group of professional skill that support people, kids on IEPs in particular. Those costs are up 11.5%, but half of that chunk of increased funding is for outside contractual services. So when you see that we're looking to bring some extra folks, an extra headcount onto staff, that's what that's about. So there's some cost savings there. That the out of house portion is only 16% of our cost today. So in terms of they're driving half the increase, but they're a small fraction of the work that gets done. Our utility bills, again, we've talked about all year. We're looking at a 23% increase in utilities and an 8% increase in supporting roles and needs like transportation, nursing, and stipends. So that's really what boils down. There is a little bucket, 12% of sort of everything else, which is a lot of stuff that's up a little bit. But I know it's a lot to take in there, but that's really the crux of where we are and what's challenging right now. A quick history for those that might tune into this later. This is the Hatfield school budget, a little history where we have been in our budgets going past, because I think some may have a perception that we have been giving a lot of money to schools, and yet our history shows that our school budget increases have been relatively small. So if we look back through fiscal 16 through 22, the average increase was 2.24%. We also have been talking a lot about enrollment and school choice, and we're going to take a deeper dive into that. But you can see that our school choice enrollment has really helped offset the declines and helped offset costs. But in recent years, that's taken a bigger hit. So I'm going to spend just a minute here talking about a shifting population, and you can see the slide, which will help, I hope. The red line that goes across the top is the number of school-aged kids who live in Hatfield, regardless of where they attend school. And you can see the drop over the last 20 years. The mountain of purple is the enrollment in Hatfield Public Schools, and the yellow is the tuition-paying students coming in by school choice. The gray, which is a sort of a small band underneath that, is a fairly steady line, is the residents who choose to choice out or go to charter schools. So you can see the number of local kids that we lose is relatively small, particularly compared to those that come in, and it's not a growing number. It's been really flat. However, the total population coming down is a bigger trend that we need to take a look at. And the recent drop off in school choice numbers is one that we need to pay attention to. But we're turning, and so I think we want to make sure that people understand, and we've talked a lot about this year, that we crafted a 3-year strategic plan that focuses on growth for students, teachers, and the district as a whole. It has measurable goals. We track it monthly, and it has 3 focused areas, not all of which have a budget cost. And we're happy to share any of that. It's available on the website. You can see our district plans. We've conducted personal outreach to every departing Smith Academy family to better understand why they made the choices that they did, and that helped inform our decision-making for the future. We've inventoried what's going on in other districts to take a look at where we could have a competitive advantage, something that would make us a destination, something that maybe others aren't doing or aren't doing as well, that would make us special, someplace to come. And also looking to see, are there gaps? Are there places where other districts have more to offer where we might be losing students, and what could we offer to help keep folks with us? And we have a group, a cross-functional group, taking a look at making sure that we're tracking any indicators if we ever need to pivot how we offer education to our students. We're taking a look at that as well. So this I'm going to go through very quickly. I really wanted to make sure it was in the presentation so that anyone that came along later that might not have seen this in a past meeting. But in particular, I wanted to ask each of the principals to speak to some of what we would expect if we were able to get an investment into our schools, what that might look like. Dr. Driscoll, do you want to speak for a minute what that would look like?
Sure. So at Smith Academy, our investment budget looks to hire 1 additional teacher, and that position is something we're calling a STEAM and applied arts teacher. So as Ms. Boudreau shared earlier, we spent quite a bit of time earlier this year talking to parents and students and families, both of students who are at Smith Academy and those who have chosen to send their kids elsewhere. And a couple of trends that really jumped out. The first is what I think we're known for and why people come to Smith Academy and to Hatfield schools is class sizes and to be known, the community. Those things rang loud and clear during those conversations. Especially with students talking about it, talking about how they're not just known as students, but they're known as people, as individuals, that they're able to make sure that they know, not that they know they're just going to learn, but that they know their teachers are going to be there for them and really hold them to what they're capable of. One thing that also came through when comparing our district to others is that we're able to offer coding classes as kind of a core part of the curriculum up through 9th grade. It's a required course. It's typically an elective, typically something that students can choose to do. And it is for us too, once they get to that higher level, but we build that foundation of computer science skills that all of our students are guaranteed to have. And that's a skill that is really important in the workforce. One of the things that we saw that we have that folks would like more of is what we're calling applied arts. So things like theater arts, chorus, things that we would like to be able to provide, but our current staffing schedule doesn't allow us to do. And as we think about science, technology, engineering, arts, and math kind of coming together, we have an opportunity to kind of merge those pieces that we've developed in computer science and things that how that can be used kind of in the arts. So things like graphic design or animation, things like that, things that we aren't currently able to provide, but we could build upon what we have. Things like theater arts, where they can work with coding applications to design sets and to make those a reality too. So really areas that you wouldn't necessarily typically think of coding and computer science as bringing a lot of life into the other things that we're able to do.
So, and Principal Petra, what about at the elementary?
So our school council created a survey that we had sent out to families, and overwhelmingly, most of our families, 66% of them had said that they really would like us to do more with the outdoor learning in our upper grades, but also Spanish was definitely something that was up there that made the top list of 58% of families indicating a need, and thought that would also be something that would be a good investment for our school, as well as coding. So I think there's 3 different options there that we definitely would like to incorporate to entice more students to come to Hatfield Elementary.
So, so you'll see we're looking for that investment into sort of the chorus and theater. Also an investment into an on-staff school psychologist at the elementary school, which would come with additional PT time for teachers. And not last on the list is an investment to include middle school sports back into our plan. So, there was an attrition of services over a long period of time. It wasn't a big cut. It was a lot of small cuts over a long period of time. Middle school sports is one I think we all feel strongly we would like to see come back, which will only increase the rest of the programs. So, and with that, is there any news on MIAA and esports?
Oh, yeah. One of the things I failed to mention when talking about kind of opportunities for technology is we are, in addition to the sports we currently offer and looking at increasing middle school participation, we're also looking, MIAA has a video gaming kind of league, I guess I would call it, that they have now, where students who are interested in that kind of engagement will actually kind of join as a team, and they'll face off against other schools in the state. They have tournaments, they have practices, they have things that you might expect in a typical sports team. And just another way that we can give opportunities to our students.
And potentially a different group of kids.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, there's a quick summary about how we would like to stay competitive. And then there's also a reflection about where we would rather not be. We know it's not likely to be cheaper in the short run or the long if we fail to invest and we fail to turn around enrollment. But we will create a plan B. And I think, we have shared in previous meetings that there's well-documented evidence around what happens when towns or even neighborhoods have to close their schools and the impacts that it has on student achievement, on property values, and the town identity as a whole. The budget for next year, as we shift into sort of taking a broader look here. So every year, for folks who play along with school committee meetings, which is 20 people, we know that the school committee votes on a school budget, and that gets submitted into town leadership. Then the finance committee and the select board set a budget recommendation, and then we collectively as town voters get together to approve that budget at town meeting. We go as school committee members to town meeting, ready to speak to the budget as needed. And based on the budget that passes at town meeting, our tax bills are set. But this year, as I think the committee knows, and probably our audience knows, is something more. There will be 2 budgets going to the floor at town meeting. One is going to meet a balanced budget, and the other is going to be what would need additional funding. And so we want to explain a little bit about those two budgets so that people can see the difference between the two. Because of Prop 2.5, any increase beyond 2.5%, we'll talk a little bit more about that, would require two votes. The vote on the budget through town meeting, and then a ballot election, which this year is May 16th. Both of those votes would be required to pass for an override budget to become the budget. So what the heck is Prop 2.5? Prop 2.5 is a state law that was passed in 1980 that sets a limit to how much a town can collect in the taxes, not counting new growth through things like adding businesses or new houses. So if you're going to add more than 2.5% to what you collect, that's what you're able to budget, you have to get approval from the voters. And if you want a more detailed view on your own time, there's a link in this presentation that tells you more than you ever wanted to know about Prop 2.5 and the tax rate process. But if you want to talk about it later, come see me, because somewhere I'm going to use the difference between debt limits and ceilings, and it's going to come in handy. I don't know what cocktail party that is. An override is the vote to add what can be collected in taxes, which then grows the budgets. It also resets the baseline. Overrides are for a specific amount of new money that gets added. And so what's available on the town website right now is the 22 town budget. The whole town budget for 22 was just over 10 million. 81% of that was funded through tax dollars. And so if we looked at that, we would have been able to increase our budget by $204,000 without an override. So just as a sense of scale, anytime you're looking at adding more than a couple $100,000 in our existing world, it would require two votes, both at town meeting and then on the ballot. So, and you'll remember how much we needed in new services to stay level. So as we've been talking about this, I've tried to think about how to explain in a quick way. And so forgive me, I'm not an illustrator. But I think it's important for us to all understand what we as voters control. And so the budgets are prepared by departments, just like us. Then they're prioritized by finance and the select board to bring to town meeting. And then they have to keep within the levy limit. So what the voters control are two things. They control the tap, which would be adding water into the measuring cup of services. So that would be investments or big improvements. And then we control how high the water gets in the cup. So when the rock comes along, which is cost increases, we have two choices. We either drain some of the services off, or we vote to spend more. And that's where we are. The cost increases at the town level, and these are numbers from our friends at the Finance Committee, say thank you. I just want to reflect that rising costs have hit everywhere. It's not specific to the school budget, and it's not specific to Hatfield. So, we saw our increases around 6.5. Mr. Sullivan and I have been tracking other school budgets in other towns. We're on the modest side of increases. So we've seen them 7% and up, some higher. Yeah. And so some of the reasons, here's a few. The health insurance costs are up 6% for the same services at the same contribution level. Retirement costs are up 8%, fuel costs 27%, the facility costs, things like utilities, 16%, insurance 5%, and it adds in a COLA of 3%, which is not keeping up with inflation. And so that collectively is $247,000 of fixed costs. And we already just talked about what the override number would be. So even just the town costs would have put us into a need for an override. For schools, the size of that rock, again, is $467,000 is what our 6.5% increase looks like. But I think it's important that we also look at the importance of the TAP. Because we're looking for that extra investment spending, I think it's critical that people remember that it adds back programs. It expands on programs that are doing well that we can keep driving forward. It brings more options in for foreign language and exploratory learning like the Forest Classroom. It continues to invest in social and emotional learning. But I think it's also prudent of us to make sure that we answer, why would we invest when budgets are so tight? And truthfully, it's because they're so tight we need to invest, which sounds ironical, I suppose, if that is not a word. But if we keep having attrition and our enrollment falls, we're going to lose more revenue. We're already fighting against population decline, and we have to be more competitive to keep our school choice students. So the goal is to spend a little bit to bring those revenues back so that we can increase by 20 students per school. And when we do that, and we've done the math on this, it will cover the cost of that investment. So, and to note, we already have 26 applicants in for next year, and it's still early days.
Grows every day.
Excellent. So the two budgets with an override, we keep this is looking across the town. We keep the services we have. The budget will be up at town meeting. The amount of the override was set on the 10th of April after months of work. You can watch those meetings. The total is $1,252,611. More than half of that is what's required to fill the gap for the level services. The balance supports needs articulated by departments, like our request for an investment. And again, it's all about growing revenue. And I think it's worth noting, not all department budget requests were funded with the override. If there is no override, the service cuts, the water we're pouring out of the measuring cup there is significant, because it takes us back to this year's budget minus 2%. But all those costs went up, so they had to offset services to be able to do that. Every department would see cuts to services. If the override fails to pass either as an override budget or at the ballot, this level funded minus 2% budget will become the budget for the year. So what does that look like for schools? That would require us to make program cuts to the tune of $572,000. And obviously, I think it goes without saying, there would be no investment. So that 572 pulls 22% of it comes from funding things like taking away supplies, athletics, food, service, dues, and it eliminates staff positions, unfortunately. So here's a quick with and without. At the elementary school, with an override, we're looking at 2 classrooms per grade, lots of attention, an average class size of 12, and adding foreign language for K through 6, as well as extra time in forest classroom. Without, we would be merging about half of those grades into a single classroom per grade. Our average class size would go up by a third, and we would lose music and art specials. At Smith Academy, with an override, we would continue to have 2 sections at every grade. The average class size in that case is 10. Lots of individual attention. We would be able to keep our school within a school program for middle school, which allows those middle school teachers to come together and work as a unit. It would continue our 7 AP classes and 2 language options. It would add additional computer science programs and the benefit of having applied computer science, which would make us a destination. We would add performing arts classes. We would add middle school sports to JV and varsity. And we would have 22 club offerings during X blocks and after school. And we would be able to have strategic attention on gaining and retaining enrollment. Without the budget override, Smith Academy would have to cut every grade down to a single section, which means on average, the class size would double. There would not be an opportunity for the middle school to team teach, which is less focused attention for our 7th and 8th graders. We would have to cut those AP classes back to 3 and only have 1 language option. It would mean limited use of the library. We believe we probably would have insufficient numbers to support musicals. We would have to cut JV sports, which obviously has long-term implications on varsity sports. We would have half the X block time, which would cut offerings by 13, so fewer choices, and significant cuts to electives. And lastly, we would have no choice but to have teachers teaching outside their certification area for some portion of their day. The staffing impact, while we looked at with an override, we would be adding 2 full-time teaching positions and 1 licensed staff support. Without an override, again, remember that salaries are the bulk of our costs. So when we look to cut, there's only so many places we could go. Those cuts would mean the loss of 8 full-time teaching positions. And we would lose half-time of an administrator. So our superintendent would become a half-time, which would mean that the principals would have more to pick up in addition to having fewer teaching staff. From a financial standpoint, one of the greatest impacts of this is likely an enrollment drop. So it's not just the cuts that would happen for next year, it would be what those cuts would do to fiscal year 25. And so if we lose strategic growth in programming that's there to build enrollment, and we compound that by shifting to a single class for many grades and doubling the majority of class sizes, having fewer electives, AP choices, and losing several elementary specials, and losing the feeder program into varsity sports, we project an enrollment drop of at least 14%. Now, going into this year, we had an 11% drop. So it's not crazy to think that that would be the case. So depending on which students would go, whether they be residents or school choice students that we lost in that kind of an enrollment decline, we're looking at a cost impact either by lost revenue or increased costs of $315,000 to more than $500,000 in school funding, which means that we would be replicating this level of cuts again next year. And at that point, I think we all have concerns about the educational integrity of what we could offer. As significant as this is to our schools, it's far from being just about our schools. This override is about every single service in town, and it would impact every single department in town: roads, police, how we care for our seniors, the fire, the ambulance, lighting, public spaces, everything. As an example, the impact on public works. So I had a chance to sit down with our DPW director. So roads, with an override, they continue to maintain all the roads. They fill potholes, they grade dirt roads, they plow, they salt, they plow the sidewalks, they replace signage, they repair guardrails, they maintain all the town vehicles, they repair and clean the culverts, they manage fuel for all the town vehicles. The transfer station is open Saturday 7 to 3 and Wednesday 12 to 5. And there's free brush pile dumping, which I got to tell you is a new service. As someone who didn't grow up here, I was like, you need to take advantage of that. They row the mowed side. They mow roadsides. That was a mouthful for a second. They mow all the town properties. They trim brush along the roadsides. They trim mulch and weed all the municipal buildings, and they paint the crosswalks. And that continues with an override. Without an override, they would have materials cut by about 20%, which would impact their ability to maintain dirt roads, and probably some of the asphalt patching as well. They wouldn't be repainting the crosswalks. The transfer station would be cut by 2 hours on Saturday service. They would be closing Wednesday. There would be no brush pile dumping anymore. And residents would need to anticipate wait times because they would also have less staff. So everyone would be using it on a smaller available time period. There would be no seasonal help. So no summer mowing, mulching, and trimming. We would reasonably see an impact in visibility in some locations because they wouldn't be there trimming all of that back. And I think if we think about the look of our town, if they aren't mulching and trimming and mowing all of that as with the same vigilance, it's a less pristine look of our town. So that's just one other department. And as we go, we will look to have other departments come in and share what their with and without scenarios look like. I think people are rightly understanding, wanting to know what is the impact of the override on their personal tax bill. And so this is just some publicly available information that anyone can look up. Our presentation has links to this, so you can take a look for yourself. You can see what your personal property assessment is and how much it impacts your bill. The Division of Local Services has a calculator, and so they share, you can type in the amount and it spits out that the average home in Hatfield, the value is $370,000. The average single family tax bill for that is just a hair under $5,000. And the override would add to that tax bill just under $715. So the increased tax rate, we would go up to 15.41, and that's 1.66 higher than it's been on average in the last 5 years. So as a quick comparison, what that looking around our area, there's 16 towns that are within a 16-mile radius of us, or at least most of their town is. And so here is two comparisons, their tax rates and their average tax bills. So out of 17 towns on tax rates, currently Hatfield is number 16. And if you said the only one we pay slightly more than is Hadley, you'd be right. Everybody else, Sunderland, Whately, Goshen, Deerfield, East Hampton, South Hadley, Northampton, Conway, Granby, Holyoke, Leverett, Williamsburg, West Hampton, Pelham, and Amherst, all pay more. And if you look at the comparative tax bill, because that factors in how much is the home worth, Hatfield is number 13 on the list of 17 today. And we would move slightly in both, with an override, in the tax rate, we would move from 16 to 14. And in the comparable tax bills, would move from 13 to 9, still in the bottom half. So that's looking at with and without the override. So what's next? There is a town-wide opportunity to come have this kind of conversation on a town-wide basis. And that's happening on Tuesday, May 2nd. It's 6 p.m. at the elementary school. And then town meeting is May 9th. I believe that's 6:30 at Smith Academy. And then town elections on May 16th. And I know several folks have said, what can we do? And so I think our voice is, for starters, understand the impacts and the importance of this. Help other people see what's coming and what's important. Obviously to show up, both to town meeting and make sure you cast your ballot on the 16th. So with that, we're going to close out with one question we primed because we've been hearing it. And so we thought we would take a swipe at answering it, and then we'll open up for other questions, whether it's through online or we'll start with the folks who came in person. So one of the questions we've had, and by all means, this is to the committee as a whole, it isn't to me, is how did we get here? And there have been different variations of how do we get here. And there's more than one thing at play, I'm sure. But I would say, having looked all this stuff up, I can share that the assessed value of all Hatfield property from 22 to 23 was up 4.8%. Inflation in Massachusetts in that time frame was 10.7%. And the tax rate between what's current and 20 years ago is less than 0.5% difference. So there's only a couple levers that you have to change what you collect. One is the rate and one is the assessed value. And we just haven't kept up with inflation. So that is the presentation. We're going to have questions and then we can go to our budget. So
Can I ask one question about, we had talked about perhaps providing childcare. Do we have any update on that? So
Sure.
we can let folks know.
for town meeting.
Yeah, we're planning to. Right now, we have a few students who have signed up to volunteer as babysitters during that time.
And at least one teacher?
Yes, one teacher.
And we're anticipating more that will.
Yeah.
And where would that take place?
That's going to take place at Smith Academy.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted folks to hear that we're trying to have that service available to them.
So help every parent come out. Other committee members with questions before I didn't think to ask them, so forgive me.
I'm just reading in the chat. Are these slides going to be available somewhere for people to see?
Yes, they will. They're actually already available through they're linked on the agenda, but we may need to we'll check and make sure that that's working. But we'll make them available multiple places.
And they're in the YouTube video.
And they're in the YouTube video. But if you want to go through them on your own pace. So
You went through them pretty quickly.
I
so.
was trying to keep a pace.
There's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information for sure. Okay. Any questions in the room?
I learned a lot, thank you.
Okay.
Chrissy, excuse me. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more to the, you mentioned a figure, 350 million, was it? That seems not, like that can't be right. But for what it costs for the school choice options, whether, and is that for students coming in? Is that for students going out? Do you know which?
So there's two different costs there, right? There's the cost for what we bring in, school choice students bring in tuition with them. It's a little over $7,000 per student. It's set at $5,000, and if they have additional services, there's some extra funding that comes with them. So using all of our school choice funds in this budget is $830,000 is funded through school choice. There is a little bit of funding that also goes out, but that comes out from the town budget. It doesn't come out from the school budget. But it's less. Is that-
Send our kids out, it's going to conceivably cost the town more.
If we
To
were
send
to
them out,
tuition
right?
our students out of district, we could look at the most apples to apples thing we have is per pupil spending that is tracked by DESE. Area districts per pupil spending is considerably more than what we spend per student. So I think we would have to assume if we tuitioned out, we would be looking at a higher bill. And we have done the math, and it is higher. The other impact of that, which isn't about the bill in the moment, it's about the potential bill that comes. So regionalized districts are a cost to a municipality similar to the way the insurance is. The rate is what the rate is, and you get the bill. And so insurance went up 6% this year. We had to find 6%. When regional school districts send new bills, and there's lots of ways they calculate them, but Kathy can tell you from time working at the state level, those regional district bills can often be pretty sizable from one year to the next, and they're not necessarily well anticipated. And so it's not uncommon for regional bills to be 7 to 10% coming in. So it's like, oh, here's your bill. Next year is going to be 7% higher. For Hatfield, we need to keep in mind that half of our town budget, just over half, is education. And so if the regional cost came in and it was 7% higher, and that's half of our full town, we're back to an override position. And in which case, if we didn't pass an override now where we were keeping control and growing our schools, what would happen if that came in later? Because then if it would be cuts to other services, because we wouldn't be able to not provide education, that wouldn't legally work. So does anybody want to amplify that, or is there anything I missed in that equation?
No, I think you explained it well.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I think that's an important piece of information because I think there are people who maybe don't have children in the system and think that regionalization is going to solve all the problems and lower the costs. And apparently, that's not the case. So I think.
An additional cost with regionalization is increased transportation costs.
Yeah,
And
so
that's
much.
something that's often forgotten. So in addition to the cost to the municipality for sending the kids, it costs to physically send them in the transport.
No, and that doesn't take into account what happens to property values when your local schools aren't there? Because, you can go on to NPR archives and find where people have talked about what happens, and they've tracked that and watched the decline. So
Yeah, I was just gonna to like add on to what both of you have been saying. I think that I would really like people to understand that I believe Hatfield has provided an amazing value for the quality of education that we provide for many, many years, for a really long time. And so I think that the school committee has thought, and the administration, and all of our parents and our whole school community has thought very carefully about how we want to invest to sort of continue that momentum. And, like Christy was saying, if we did go with like a tuition type model, financially, it would cost more by all accounts. We would lose some of that control. And then just all of the other benefits to having our own district, all of the benefits that Hatfield Elementary and Smith Academy bring to Hatfield, we really would lose. So I think it's been a lot of years of excellent budgeting, but
and careful stewardship on an administrative side to keep all of that going. It's a cultivated group of teachers who stayed because they don't make as much teaching here as they would somewhere else. But they have great kids in their class and they're excited to be here. So that's important. Some other things that show up when you regionalize is you have lower participation. So one of the things that I think, Connor's mission moment spoke to so well is our kids are involved. And they're not, and they get involved in multiple things because you become a jack of all trades, because you're not just on the ball field, you're in the musical and you're in the band and and so there's a richness that comes from that. And it's much harder for that to happen when your activities aren't local. It takes that opportunity away from a lot of kids, or at least the research says. So do
we have any questions from people that are tuning in?
So I can't quite read
Thanks.
that.
People are still looking to where they would be, they're still looking for a link to where they could find the slides.
Okay, the links on the agenda are not working, so we can work to
Okay.
fix that.
And then the question is, how much per student leaves when they school choice to other schools?
It would depend on the student and the services that student has. And also keep in mind, it's not just a school choice out. There are students who leave for vocational school and charter schools. On average, students that leave us, combining all of that together, is about $4,000 more than a school choice student coming in. So
the town would have to make a decision about where it could send all of its kids. School choice is a parent choice.
right. So school choice, and so tuitioning out as a district and school choicing out are different conversations. It's also probably worth noting that even if we wanted to tuition out, if there were some magical savings there, it's not something you can pull the trigger on in a matter of months. There is a arduous process that the state has outlined, and it's available online, and so it's not on the table for right now, regardless.
Right.
So, any other questions from online? Okay, any new questions in the room?
You can't see all the participants. Are they raising the hand on Zoom or are they typing in the
No.
chat?
No, I don't see any.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any additional conversation the committee would like to have before we turn to a vote on our budget?
The only thing I wanted to add, because we were talking about transportation costs to go out, is just keeping in mind too that right now we're in a major transportation shortage everywhere.
Mhm.
That's all.
So to be clear, we're going to vote on the
Yeah.
the higher budget.
Yep. So I'll clarify that.
Okay.
So the budget that's coming up tonight is the budget that includes the investment cost. If this were not to pass through town meeting and then on the subsequent ballot to allow for the override, we will be coming back to vote on a revised budget. And that revised budget would require us to cut $574,000, I think. And so that we would come back and have in front of us. But we understand from our council, we can only submit one budget. We just know what the cost cut would be should it not pass. And then we would come back and vote again. At which point we would have some very difficult, there would be some pretty challenging decisions.
And just to be clear, one more time, we will vote on this budget soon, and then whenever we have done that, the budget has to pass at both
Correct.
town meeting, which is May
9th,
9th, and then 1 week later on the ballot,
16th.
both things. So if either one of those don't pass, we're going to have to come back.
It is hypothetically possible that should it pass the ballot and not at town meeting, that they could have an emergency town meeting and put the budget back up for a vote. So I would like to think.
Will it be on the ballot at all if it
Yes.
fails at
Yeah, the
town
ballots will be
meeting?
printed.
The ballot's gone.
decided.
Right.
So if it doesn't pass at town meeting, it'll still be on the budget, but
So there's,
This will be on the ballot.
okay.
And there would be, yeah. And towns have done that where they come back. And we've agreed that there wouldn't be any changes, any communication on any staffing changes until after that vote.
I do encourage everyone to attend the Board of Selectmen meeting next Tuesday to get the bigger picture of how it affects the entire town. If you like living in Hatfield, if you like the way of life here, now's the time to take action to preserve that.
and that's a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance.
Correct. And they're
Committee,
going to
right?
go through all the departments on how it will affect our fire, ambulance, police, DPW, water, sewer, everything.
I believe it's similar to this too, right? Where folks will
Yes.
have the opportunity to
Yes.
ask questions, follow up,
Absolutely.
get clarity.
And we will be there to answer questions as well. And as those departments have updates, we will update our materials as well, so that if somebody is finally linked, once we get our link out there, we can continue to update that. So, and there's work on a sheet of frequently asked questions. So that's in the works so that there's more information coming. We're just trying to get it as inclusive of all departments as possible.
I'm just wondering, because people asked if we could put the link in the chat. The links are not working, but if we did put the link in the chat now, then wouldn't they be able to get it once you activate it? So is there a way to do that?
It is
It
active.
is active. It's a matter of.
The link from the PDF that's on the town, that was posted on the town's website, I believe is not working, but the one from the shared Google Doc is. So we copied that into the chat, it should work.
So, okay.
Are you
Michael's
looking
on
for
it.
a motion?
I am looking for a motion.
I will make a motion to approve the fiscal year 24 school budget as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion on the budget?
Amazing job, Adam and Christy and Mr. Wood. I think this has to be the toughest job we've ever had in creating a budget.
I was just going to say the same thing. Thanks
But
to finance.
Kudos to you
Yes.
guys, and thank you for the many, many, many hours of hard work.
I think all of us that have worked on it really believe in our schools. So it's a worthwhile venture. Okay. Any additional conversation? All in favor of the proposed fiscal year 24 budget? Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And so our budget passes 5-0. That's going to conclude our meeting for tonight. Anything that was on the agenda, we will table for the May 8th meeting. Okay, and with that, is there a motion to
John.
I know I have access.
adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all to those who came tonight and came online. Appreciate your attendance.